There was a time when no one knew what 10 o'clock meant. The world itself was the only clock, and people learned to read its face, not of numbers or hands, but of light and sound. The sun, the moon, the crowing of a rooster, the cooling of morning mist, these were the only signs that told people where they stood in the day. Before clocks, life moved like a breath. It expanded with the dawn and exhaled with the dusk. There was no hurry, no deadlines, no alarms to shatter the stillness of early morning. People awoke when the world awoke, and slept when darkness folded over their homes. In the quiet of medieval villages, mornings began not with a bell, but with light slipping through cracks in wooden shutters. Farmers stretched their tired arms, listening to the faint rustle of the wind outside. The smell of damp earth filled the air, a reminder that the sun had risen, even if no one could say what time it was. The rhythm of life followed the fields. The farmer didn't need a clock to tell him it was time to plow. He looked at the sky. If the sun had climbed above the old oak tree, it was time to work. If shadows stretched long and thin across the soil, it was time to rest. For the blacksmith, time was measured by the glow of his forge. When the coals turned from red to gray, he knew the day was old. The baker watched the rising of his dough, not the ticking of a minute hand. In every craft, the body remembered its own rhythm, shaped by seasons, sunlight, and instinct. Evenings came softly. There were no glowing screens or chiming clocks to remind people that the day had ended. They knew because the birds fell silent. Because the air grew colder. Because the stars appeared one by one above their thatched roofs, steady and patient. Families gathered by candlelight. The wax melting slowly, drop by drop, a quiet, natural clock of its own. Shadows flickered across the walls as stories were told, laughter shared, and silence stretched between words. People listened, to each other, to the creak of the house settling into night, to the soft hum of crickets outside. There was no rush to sleep, no fear of oversleeping. The body trusted the world to wake it when morning came again. In cities, where bells marked the hours for churches and markets, time began to take a shape. But even then, it wasn't precise. The bell in one town could ring a few minutes before another. People didn't mind. A little before noon, or after the sun's highest point, was close enough. Life was measured in feelings, not seconds. Soon, after supper, before the moon rises. Words that left space for living, not just scheduling. A traveler on horseback didn't ask what hour it was. He asked, how much daylight is left? And the answer would come, enough to reach the next village if you hurry. That was time, soft, breathing, human. When the night deepened, the world slowed into stillness. There were no glowing digits to chase sleep away. No ticking to remind you of passing hours. Only darkness and the slow crackle of the hearth. People dreamt longer then. They often woke in the middle of the night, not to check the clock, but to think, to whisper, to pray. Some called it the watch of the soul. In those quiet hours, time itself felt alive, stretching and folding around the human heart. There was no need to capture it, no fear of losing it. For as long as the stars shone, the world was exactly where it needed to be. But change was coming. In distant monasteries, monks began to notice something, that prayer could not always rely on sunrise or sunset alone. Their lives revolved around devotion, and devotion demanded order. So they began to mark time differently, not with the sky, but with sound. Bells. Each bell called monks to prayer, dividing the day into sacred fragments, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. For the first time, the day was not a single river, it was a series of steps. Time had been tamed, shaped by metal and ritual. Still, outside the monastery walls, people lived as they always had. Farmers, traders, shepherds, their clocks were clouds and shadows. They measured the day by the warmth of the sun or the length of their own shadows across the ground. And perhaps, without knowing it, they lived closer to peace. At night, under a blanket of stars, the world was not divided into hours. Children slept without fear of lateness. Women tended fires that burned low, their faces glowing in the amber light. Somewhere, a traveler sang softly to his horse as they crossed a moonlit path. In that silence, life was whole. There was no race against time, because time itself had no finish line. The story of time did not begin with a clock's tick, it began with a bell's echo. In quiet monasteries across Europe, the monks' world depended on prayer. And prayer depended on order. To rise before dawn, to kneel at noon, to chant when the stars returned, all required a way to measure what the sky could not always show. So they built their first tools of time. Water clocks, simple bowls that dripped, one drop at a time, into another vessel. The steady rhythm of water was their heartbeat. When the bowl overflowed, it was time to pray. But water could freeze in winter or evaporate in heat. And so, the monks began dreaming of something more constant, something that would not forget. That dream would change the world. By the 13th century, somewhere in Europe, the first mechanical clocks began to appear, not in homes, but in church towers. Great, creaking machines made of iron and faith. Their gears turned slowly, driven by falling weights. When the bell rang, its sound traveled across fields and rivers, marking the hours for everyone within earshot. The people didn't see the gears, they only heard their echo, the birth of measured time. For the first time, the day was divided into strict hours. Farmers in nearby villages began to notice that their lives now followed the bell, not the sun. Markets opened when the church said it was the third hour. Work began and ended not with the sky, but with metal. Time had found its cage. At first, people didn't mind. It brought order, predictability. Ships could plan departures, merchants could trade by agreement, and cities began to move in sync. But slowly, the rhythm of life began to shift. The farmer could no longer linger in the fields just because the sunset was beautiful. The blacksmith could not work until the forge grew tired. There was a new master, invisible but absolute. The clock did not care for mood, nor for the song of birds. It ticked forward, steady, cold, perfect. And humanity began to follow. In the centuries that followed, timepieces grew smaller, from church towers to walls, from walls to wrists. Each invention made time more personal, but also more demanding. When the pocket watch arrived, time left the church and entered the human hand. A man could now carry his schedule in his pocket, glancing down to see not the sun, but his own responsibility. Later, as factories rose during the industrial age, the clock became a weapon. The whistle that started the day, the bell that ended it. Time became money, and minutes were currency. The world that once moved like a breeze now marched like a machine. But let's pause here, and listen. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the world before all this noise. Imagine standing in a meadow at dawn, when the air is still, and the only sound is the distant hum of the earth awakening. You feel the warmth of sunlight on your face, the chill of dew on your hands. You don't know what time it is, and you don't need to. That's how it felt to live before clocks. A life without numbers. A life measured by breath, by laughter, by seasons. You woke when light touched your eyelids. You rested when shadows grew long. You didn't rush to finish. You didn't fear being late. You simply existed, carried gently by the rhythm of nature. There was beauty in that unmeasured life. People listened more, not just to each other, but to the world itself. The sound of rain against rooftops, the sigh of wind through trees, the heartbeat of footsteps on an empty road. These were not interruptions, they were reminders that the world was alive, and that you were part of it. Every hour was sacred, not because it was counted, but because it was lived. Today, our clocks glow in every corner, on phones, on walls, on wrists. We know the exact second of sunrise, the minute of our next meeting, the hour of our next sleep. But sometimes, beneath all that precision, we forget what time truly is. Time was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be felt. The monks who built those early clocks sought devotion, not domination. They wanted to honor the passing of the day, not to control it. Maybe we can still return to that quiet understanding. Maybe, once in a while, we can live as they did, without watching the minutes fall away. Tonight, as you listen to this story and the world around you grows still, imagine that ancient silence once again. No clocks. No alarms. No schedules waiting for dawn. Only the slow turning of the earth, the soft glow of the stars, and the rhythm of your own heartbeat keeping perfect time. Because before clocks, that was enough. And perhaps, in the quiet between now and sleep, it still is.